Okay, welcome to another episode of Thoughts and Bolts. My name is Pedro Oliveria, and today's episode is called The UFO of Man. In this episode, I want to kind of describe where I'm at in the UFO subject and basically describe my personal theory about the UFO phenomenon. Now, my theory isn't original at all. In fact, it's very similar to that of Jason Reza Georgiani. Um, but the thing that's important to me is not the theory itself, but how I came to the theory. In other words, I'm not so much concerned about what people's UFO theories are as much as I am how they came to those tentative conclusions. And so hopefully I can not just describe what I think might be happening, because I could be wrong, but also how I got there. Okay. And I've made a UFO theory video before, when this channel first got started, but this is where I am now. So let's get into it. First of all, I want to talk about kind of this thing called the philosophical razor. So William of Ockham is known for the razor. Um, you know, don't multiply. What is it? Don't multiply entities unnecessarily. Right. This is Occam's razor. People often misinterpret this as pick the most boring, most mundane, and least magical option. But that's not what it means. It means pick the explanation with the fewest assumptions. Pick the explanation with the theory with the fewest moving parts, let's say. Simpler is better, less is more. And the irony is that, atheists use this all the time, but William of Ockham was a monk. And the most simple theory of all, if parsimony is king for you, would be that the only thing that exists is God and that God is the cause of everything, right? That's like the most parsimonious theory. I don't believe parsimony is everything. Parsimony is useful, it's a good rule of thumb, but it's not everything. There are other things to think about than just parsimony. So this is an example of a razor, right? Occam's razor, don't multiply entities unnecessarily, right? And then you have Lee's razor, which is to exist is to be perceived, right? And basically what Berkeley is arguing is that we shouldn't attribute, we shouldn't postulate causes that we can't prove already exist, right? We shouldn't postulate the existence of things we can't prove exist that we haven't perceived for ourselves, right? Again, uh, Berkeley was an idealist. He was arguably the first idealist metaphysician in the West since Parmenides, right? For Berkeley, the only thing that existed ultimately were God and spirits. And so, for Berkeley, um, we shouldn't posit the existence of matter which exists outside of our perception because we never perceive anything outside of our perception, right? So that was his razor, to be is to be perceived, to exist is to be perceived, right? Um, and then there's this guy, Jason Reza Georgiani, who is now my favorite philosopher. And in this show, I've been doing a series on Prometheus and Atlas, and I've been communicating with him behind the scenes. He's been very gracious. And I've come up with what I call Georgiani's scissors. And no, it doesn't have anything to do with lesbians. Basically, it's a it's not a razor because there's two prongs to it like a scissor, right? So, first one is imagine that infinite creativity is possible. Okay. My original version was nothing is impossible, but that's not true. I mean, in Giorgiani's philosophy, there are things that are impossible. So, if you believe in the Parmenidean one, if you believe that, you know, this whole existence is nothing but a dream and a sleeping Vishnu, then you cannot believe in free will. If this whole existence is nothing but a dream and a sleeping Vishnu, then free will can't exist. And so that is impossible, right? Um, but imagine that infinite creativity is possible, both by humans and by nature, right? Um, and then the second part of it is be empirical. So when it comes to creating theories, scientific theories, philosophical theories, or explanations for things like the UFO phenomenon, this I think is a good philosophical razor. The first part makes it so that you don't wave off possibilities based on your pre-existing worldview, right? Impossible, therefore not true, right? You see this a lot with a lot of UFO skeptics, right? They have their pre-existing, you know, hyper materialist worldview, and so anything that doesn't fit into that box cannot be true. And the same thing goes for religious fundamentalists, right? They're, the hardcore atheist materialists and the religious fundamentalist are actually the same person. They're simply an inverted version of each other. So the first, part of this razor keeps you from haphazardly discarding possibilities a priori, right? But the second part of this razor keeps you grounded in demonstrable facts, right? So be empirical. Uh, you have to be able to show that, at very least, that the premises that undergird your argument are demonstrably true to the satisfaction of all living sane people. Um, so, this is great. So, both of these halves of the Georgiani scissors counterbalance each other and feed into each other. Um, the second part keeps us from going into just imagination, la la land, which is what, a lot of ufology can be, right? For some people, ufology is just this Renaissance fair of science and magic and anything you want it to be. That's what the UFO phenomenon is, right? So I think that I like this heuristic, which I'm calling the Georgiani scissors, right? Imagine that infinite creativity is possible and to be empirical. And I'm going to use that as my guide uh, for parsing out this UFO theory. I always say that the best part of any nonfiction book is the bibliography. Um, and as good as Georgiani's books are, I would say that the bibliographies are even better. So, like, even if you don't agree with him, at least read what he's reading and see if you can come up with something better, right? Um, yeah, I love nonfiction. So, uh, the UFO phenomenon. Let's be empirical, okay? Let's be empirical. There's only one species of organism in all of existence that we can prove makes flying machines. Okay? There's only one organism, one species in all of existence that we can prove makes flying machines. And that's Homo sapiens. Okay? So we don't need to postulate some other, kind of being in order to explain the UFO phenomenon. Because if the UFOs are flying machines, and they appear to be, then we don't need to imagine some hypothetical alien species, some hypothetical extraterrestrial species. Okay? We don't have to. We already have an animal that makes flying machines, and his name is Homo sapiens. So for now, we're at home with the skeptics, right? We're at home with Neil deGrasse Tyson. We're at home with Michael Shermer. We're at home with Nick West, excuse me. You know, um, if you see a UFO in the sky, right, a flying machine that can't be identified, and you assume it's man-made, you're probably right. That's an empirical that's a conclusion based on empirical data, right? Human beings make flying machines. We know that for a fact. We don't know for a fact whether any other organism does. Okay? But there's a problem here. Because if you look at the UFO phenomenon historically, right, formerly declassified, reports from Wright-Patterson Air Force Base in the late 1940s, right? The most common UFO phenotype is that of a sphere. If you go into the Brazilian declassified UFO study from the year 2001, again, the most common UFO phenotype is circular, a sphere. If you go into Project Condign, declassified, again, formerly secret British UFO study but done by the British government, the most common UFO phenotype is a ball or sphere. And if you go into early modern times in Central Europe, people were seeing weird spheres in the sky. Okay. These are examples from Basel, Switzerland. Uh, Same thing, very famous example from Nuremberg, modern day Germany. And let's not forget the appearance of very common UFO motifs in ancient texts like the Rig Veda. I'll let you read this for yourself. And who can forget, of course, Ezekiel's wheel? If you can read Hebrew without the vowels, I'll let you read this. It's Ezekiel chapter 1, right? Again, a lot of stuff very similar to what we encounter in the UFO phenomenon. Um, I did 3 videos before this channel started growing on UFOs in ancient Rome and UFOs in medieval Japan. Okay, and I'm not going to kind of adjudicate that case here, but I will post the links in the description. Please watch those videos. They're really, really good. I just let the Romans and the Japanese speak for themselves, and I highlight the similarities between their mythos and what we talk about today in the UFO phenomenon. Okay. So the UFO of man, right? What's my theory? Well, I would say that what's happening here in ancient and medieval times is also man made. And for this, I appeal to Hal Puthoff's ultra-terrestrial models and specifically this theory. And you can pause it and read it for yourself. But essentially, what I think is happening is that there is a human race, a human civilization that goes back to prehistoric times, and they had achieved an amazingly high level of technological sophistication, in antiquity, right? And this is where the Atlantis story comes from. This is where Noah's Ark comes from. This is where all the different flood myths come from, right? Because, we have all these flood stories in all these different cultures from all over the world who never communicated to each other with, survivors, starting over. But if you look at the archaeological data, there's nothing to substantiate the idea that there was a flood that covered the entire world, 5,000 years ago or whatnot. Um, and that all the animals and all the people in the world are descendant from one little family that survived on the boat. And yet you have all these crazy flood stories in all these different cultures. So it seems to me that one way to explain that would be that there was some, advanced civilization in prehistory that underwent a collapse and that there were survivors. And some of those survivors just went native. Um, and intermingled with the rest of us. And some of those survivors went underground and stayed underground uh, for their own self preservation, the preservation of their culture, perhaps the preservation of their genome, um, the preservation for whatever it is that made them different, right? And they've been here ever since, and they're still here, and that this is the cause of the UFO phenomenon, right? And I think Georgiani is right when he says that should these people ever make themselves known uh, to the rulers of the world in public, it won't be by having a flying saucer land in front of the UN or land on the White House lawn or land in Tiananmen Square. Rather, they will be coming out of limousines because they are people, um, just like you and me. And it should be noted that, if you look at the free study, the most common phenotype encountered in the close encounter phenomenon is that of a Nordic person, Northern European phenotype. But, this theory, when I was preparing this PowerPoint, I just wanted to leave it at that, right? I wanted to say that, look, different civilizations progress under, uh, you know, progress in their own different, technological branches, so to speak, right? Their own unique technological trajectories, right? The Maya produced this amazingly complex and accurate calendar system that is only surpassed by modern calendars using atomic clock, right? Before the atomic clock, right? Before we were able to tell time, based on you know, the decay of a strontium atom or something like that. And the Mayan calendar was the most accurate calendar. Now it's the second most accurate calendar by fractions of a second. You know, um, the classic Maya were able to produce that kind of a calendar, but they did not have metallurgy, as far as I know. They were Stone Age culture, right? And yet, the Bantu speaking peoples of sub Saharan Africa did not have, the cities and the irrigation and the calendar systems of the Maya, but they did develop metallurgy, right? Similarly, Western Europeans, specifically Freud, and later Carl Jung, they developed psychoanalysis. The, you know, Chinese and Japanese and Indians didn't develop psychoanalysis, but they did develop meditation, right? Whether it's Vipassana meditation or Zen meditation, they did develop a different kind of technique, right? Than, let's say, that of the psychoanalyst. And both of these techniques do different things, right? Because again, different civilizations evolve along different technological trajectories in accordance with their needs, um, found in their environment, and the techniques and technology that they develop in order to survive in those environments, in turn, uh, develops their metaphysics and their epistemology, which again causes them to develop more technique and technology according to that trajectory, and in turn creates this, eternal feedback loop between, worldview and craft that we hear so much about in Prometheus and Atlas, or we will when we get there. So the biggest problem this theory has, I wanted to just keep it crypto-terrestrial, right? There was an ancient breakaway civilization, and they're still with us, and they're hiding out, and they're vulnerable. Perhaps they suffer from intense inbreeding, and so that's why abductions happen, and they take DNA samples because they want to you know alleviate some of the problems that come from intense endogamy, let's say. But the problem I have with that is that something like the Tic Tac UFO, right, doesn't just represent one technological innovation, it represents thousands, right? If you look at Western Indo-European peoples, uh, if you look at the Proto-Indo-Europeans who invented the chariot, and you go from that to the Wright brothers to Starship. Starship is only found in Florida, right? There's only one place in the world that has Starship. It's Florida, right? But if you look all around the world, you can find all the different technological um, innovations that went into something like Starship existing, whether you're talking about material science or computers or rocketry or all the way going back all the way to the steam engine, all the different technological innovations that went into creating Starship, right? Going back to the chariot till today, I mean, those innovations are found in the archaeological record all across the world, right? And so it would stand to reason that if, there was some ancient human civilization that was able to evolve to the point of having a tic tac, let's say, that all the different technological innovations from, let's say, the, flint axe to the flying saucer would be found in the archaeological record all over the world. And we don't have that. And so there's only one thing I think that kind of solves that problem, and it's time travel. Now, I'm not a physicist, and in the comments, please correct me if I'm wrong, but from what I understand, Einstein's theories of relativity, whether that's special or general, please educate me, allow for time travel to happen. Okay. I don't know how, I don't know the specifics, but if you have the block theory of time, um, you know, according to Einstein, it's possible to go back in time. Okay. At least mathematically possible, right? How you actually do that is an engineering problem, right? But the the possibility of going into the past, right, traveling into the past, and into the future is not impossible. It's a real possibility in Einstein's theories. Um, Now, here's another thing, um, another way to get there, and it's this, right? You take the major UFO theories, and again, we're sticking with empiricism, right? And so we know for a fact that the only organism we have any proof of being able to create flying machines is Homo sapiens. You discard all the UFO theories that are not anthropogenic, let's say. And that leaves us with basically two, right? Future humans and breakaway civilization. And if you appeal to parsimony, right, Occam's razor, you can combine them into one, right? And talk about a temporal breakaway civilization, so to speak. And so the way to kind of alleviate this problem, right, with this ancient guy having a flying saucer before his civilization collapsed for whatever reason, would be to say that he himself is the descendant of what we would call future humans. Okay, so this would mean that our descendants in the distant future, maybe not too distant future, for whatever reason, decided to go back to prehistoric times and start fresh. It's possible that our descendants, despite their technological advancement, didn't make the moral advancement we would hope and just made a muck of the future and decided to go back and start over somewhere. Um, and that this didn't really play out the way they would have hoped in the long run. Okay. So that would be a way to explain how this ancient guy, prehistoric man, could have technology far ahead of ours without that, all the precursors needed for that to happen to be found in the archaeological record. Okay. Um, but again, that's not all, right? You have the space-time metric engineering dirt, which describes the leading theory about how UFOs fly. And if this is correct, and I think it is because it explains all the different observables found in the close encounter phenomenon, especially the abduction phenomenon. And this was produced way after, uh, you know, those the most famous cases in the abduction phenomenon actually occurred. And Alcubierre, the Mexican physicist who, uh, proved that, Einstein's uh, theories of general relativity, I believe in special relativity, maybe Einstein's theories of relativity allow for warp drive. He wrote that paper again after most of the big UFO abduction cases happened. So it's very interesting. Basically, though, I think that this is awesome because it explains through one single mechanism how all the weirdness of the UFO abduction phenomenon happens. And you would have to say, if this is true, that the flying saucer, the Tic Tac, is a time machine of sorts. Why? Because time is is flowing much faster within the warp bubble than outside the warp bubble. Okay, that's why they can, go from zero to hypersonic instantaneously without a sonic boom, without everything in the craft going splat. It's why the craft, according to many abductees, is bigger on the inside than it is on the outside. Um, and this is because, again, time and space are functioning differently within the warp bubble than they are outside the warp bubble. So, this has been explained before by Hal Puthoff, most recently in, Age of Disclosure documentary. But if that's the case, then already the UFO is a time machine of sorts, right? When it's turned on and flying around, you can spend 4 hours inside of it, but only lose 4 minutes of time, let's say, uh, as it pertains to the rest of us. So again, to manipulate space is to manipulate time. And so if this is possible and is happening, then who's to say that actual time travel isn't possible, right? These are engineering problems, not physics problems. Um, Also, this explains the existence of the gray, right? Because again, the second most common phenotype of non-human in the close encounter literature is the gray. According to this theory, the gray would be a GMO, a genetically modified organism. Um, I don't like the term biological android because robots are assembled, right? And organisms are grown. I think a more apt description would be biologically modified organism. I think, um, if time is going much faster within the warp bubble than it is going outside the warp bubble, and you're a human being, this is, not the kind of travel you would do often, right? Maybe once in a while, but not all the time. Because if you were to fly a tic tac on a regular basis every day for whatever reason, you're literally wasting your life, right? You're literally just throwing your life away, right? And if you had things to do that required this kind of travel, and you didn't want to be directly involved because you didn't want to throw away your life, what you might do is genetically modify chimpanzee, let's say. You take the chimpanzee, maybe you splice it with some kind of human DNA, the kind of human DNA that accounts for us being physically weaker, but much more intelligent than the chimpanzee, much less hairy than the chimpanzee. And let's say you just crank that up to level 10, right? And so you take a chimpanzee, you make it as smart as a person, let's say, but much weaker than a person. Um, and you have your own little minion, right? To do whatever it is you need it to do. Um, and that is what you would do, right? And that's why the gray would be disposable, right? It could fly around in your tic tac. It could age prematurely. It could have radiation damage from entering and exiting the craft while it's turned on. And you could just throw it away when you're done, right? And if this is the case, it really draws into question the ethics of these people, right? That they would treat um, a genetically modified organism that way, and one which has comparable intelligence to that of a human being. Um, Again, it draws into question their ethics. It's very Mengelian, uh, referring to Mengele, the Nazi scientist who did horrible experiments on human beings. So yeah, these are not space brothers, and their being part of a different civilization means for sure that they have a completely different worldview and different ethics than you and I do. So that's where I'm at with the UFO phenomenon. This is what I think is happening, and I think that the Space Brothers ET narrative is their smokescreen, right? It's what they told contactees like George Adamski, right? And Billy Meyer, right? And you'll say, oh well, George Adamski and Billy Meyer were liars and charlatans. Yeah, those are the perfect kind of people you want to appear to, right? You appear to the liar, the charlatan, the kook, right? Tell him what you want said. Hey, we come from another planet. We come from Venus. We come from Mars, right? And then once that person's credibility is destroyed, so is the credibility in your existence. And once you go to Venus, once you go to Mars, you see there's nothing there. You see, aha, it's all nonsense. And so these people get to hide in plain sight. Well, we have, SETI focusing all its attention to distant galaxies. It should be looking within our cave systems at the bottom of our oceans. Okay. It's the ultimate psyop, right? Um, and this also draws into question, official government secrecy. How is it, assuming, the Chinese and the Russians also have their own crashed craft, how is it that the Chinese, the Russians, and the Americans all agree on hiding the UFO truth? Um, how is that possible? Is it because their secrecy has three distinct causes? Or are we going to be parsimonious and say that the secrecy of the three superpowers all have a single cause? And if a single cause, what better cause than the UFO phenomenon itself? Whether it's because these governments are acquiescing to the Nordic demand for secrecy, or is it because they are being manipulated unawares, right? Our thirst for power over one another, our violence toward one another, our fear of one another. Who's to say that's not being manipulated by these people? And they are people, I think, in order to maintain their secrecy and you know, their distinct way of life. Um, because though they may be technologically more advanced than us in many fields, it's possible that they are very vulnerable as well. And hence why they want to be left alone, um, and, doing what they do uh, without having much contact with us, other than, of course, to manipulate us and use us as they see fit. Um, and so this is also explains UFO secrecy, right? This deals a very big blow to the mainstream acknowledged civilizations of the world, because there is no such thing as human civilization. There are human civilizations. There's, the Iranian civilization, there's the Hindu civilization, Semitic civilization, Western European civilization, Eurasian civilization, Mesoamerican civilization. There are human civilizations. And if this theory is true, it would suggest that none of them are sovereign, right? Because the sovereign is the one who decides who lives and who dies, and the one with the best weapons is the one who does that. So, that's where I'm at. Um, and you'll notice this is very similar to Georgiani's theory, but it's a little bit more stripped down. But more importantly, I just want to show you how I got there, right? How I got there. And to recap, how I got there is very simple, right? I imagine that infinite creativity is possible, and I insist on empiricism. Mm, I can prove to you that human beings make flying machines. No one can prove to me that there's another species out there that can and does. And so to do that requires a form of special pleading. Uh, and so I think that yeah, when you do look in the sky and you see a UFO, it's man-made, and but you just don't know from when it comes, right? Who made it? And you would literally have to open it and look inside, right, to know that. Um, again, this I'm right at home with the skeptics up until you realize that the UFO phenomenon is ancient. I mean, it's medieval and it's ancient, um, and it's panhuman. And so the only way to explain that is to accept the possibility that there was an ancient human civilization far more advanced than we are now. Their civilization imploded, it collapsed. Some of the survivors, again, went native, intermarried with the rest of us. But most of them went underground, literally, and under the sea, and maybe even in space. Maybe they have a settlement on the moon, or on Mars, who knows, or on any of Saturn's moons, who knows. But should they ever make themselves known to the general public, it won't be by landing on the White House lawn. It'll be, you know, coming out of limousines. Um, and the biggest, I think, counter argument to this idea is the fact that, if humanity ever went from, you know, stone hand axes to the tic tac, that all the intermediary steps would be found in the archaeological record all over the world, and we don't find that. And the way you solve that is by appealing to time travel. It's not physically impossible, according to Einstein. Again, you start with anthropogenic theories and you appeal to parsimony to make this temporal breakaway civilization theory. Um, and why is this possible? Again, the UFO exhibits all the observables qualities of a time machine. Okay. And you know, the negative effects of using a space-time metric manipulation uh, necessitates the creation of a genetically modified organism that has comparable intelligence, but is also disposable. Okay. So I think that the gray is some kind of genetically modified hominid or primate, and or primate, right? Because hominids are primates. So whether the gray is a genetically modified chimpanzee or a genetically modified Homo habilis, who knows? But they're GMOs and they are looked upon by the Nords as disposable. And this is what you would do if you did not want to spend too much time in a engineered space-time metric. And so yeah, that's where I'm at. If you see a UFO, right? It's either made by Lockheed, um, these Atlanteans, for lack of a better word, or future humans, right? And you can't know unless you actually open it up and look inside. Okay. So that's where I'm at. Tell me what you think. I could be wrong, and I would like to be wrong. I mean, look, you have the love and light UFO people, the pure consciousness people, and I would love for that theory to be true. I leaned toward it at one time, but I think it's especially dangerous in the sense that if you over spiritualize the UFO phenomenon, you make it easier for the legacy program to hide the actual nuts and bolts technology in perpetuity. And again, if ultimately all of these ancient Aryans and these future time travelers are our descendants, who's to say that the legacy program isn't hiding this from us because they see themselves and themselves only as the progenitors of this super race? Look, they're Nords, right? They're Nords. They're not mestizos. They're not black people, right? They're not Asians. Okay. They're Nords, right? So it's possible that these legacy program folks that are pro secrecy see themselves as the progenitors of this master race and they don't want to screw that up. I don't know if that's true, but if this theory is true, then that's a distinct possibility, isn't it? So, uh, this is not a theory I want to be true at all, but uh, if our heuristic is Georgiani's scissors, right? Be empirical, imagine an infinite creativity as possible. And if we sprinkle a dash of Berkeley and Occam, then I think this is the best theory there is, or a subset of the best theory there is. And I think that Jim Ryder's fascination with Alice Bailey, right? Um, lends, well, let me put it this way. This theory has explanatory value, right? It would explain why he would be into theosophy. It would explain why Tom DeLonge was given the hints he was given. Okay. And it would explain, you know, so much of the close encounter phenomena, right? And it would explain the ultimate cause of UFO secrecy. Again, I don't want this to be true, but I think this is the best possible guess I can make based on what I know. And I want to know what you think in the comments. At the end of the day, um, the most important takeaway, I think, for the common man who doesn't have a security clearance or a science background like you and I, or at least like me, for people like me, is that consciousness is not classified. Consciousness is not classified. Learn how to meditate, learn how to do remote viewing, do whatever it takes to understand the subjective universe. Watch these videos that I'm going to put in the description, and you'll understand more about the UFO theory by doing that than by watching this show on 1.5 speed, which I recommend. Good night.